Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Inside OSU Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Hildebrandt. We're joined today by Taylor Williams, who has done a lot of different things. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Hard to define him as any one thing, but we'll learn more as we go here. Let's go all the way back and start from the beginning. Where did you come to OSU from? Where'd you grow up?
So I actually grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a little bit, and then moved to Edmond, Oklahoma, halfway between my life, and then graduated from there, from MSNFA, and then came to OSU.
All right, so you've traversed most parts of the state then in your lifetime. As I was learning about you, I read that you grew up on a ranch some. What was ranch life like as a kid?
All my summers was go spend up with my grandpa in Omuggy, and I guess that's where like our horses was. That's where he had, his horse, my dad's horse, my horse. It was all up there in Omuggy. So my summers were just up there with him, riding horses every day. And he taught me how to ride my horse. It was like he saddled up the horse for me and was like, get on and figure out yourself. And he opened his screen door or whatever in the house, and sitting in his recliner was like, just pass through the front door every now and then, so I know you're still on. So like that's just pretty much how I figured out how to ride my own horse, was just teaching myself and just going when I was like super, super little.
And he had a nickname, the Lawman, from being early on in the Pony Express days. Did you know about that early on? Like, when did you learn that part of his history?
No, so I didn't know Lawman and like that part of it until like mainly like high school, and like why he was called Lawman and all that stuff. But like the Pony Express history, like I've been doing that ever since I was little, just because like he was the one who like invented the whole event and everything. So my dad did it for years and years and years until we started taking basketball serious, where like he couldn't rodeo anymore, which is like my dad gave up rodeoing just to follow us around with basketball. So like if we wasn't really into basketball like that, my dad would probably still be rodeoing, never even got out of it.
Did you end up with a cool rodeo nickname?
No, not a cool rodeo.
We're gonna have to fix that at some point. You've mentioned basketball a couple of times, and you spent time on the scout team for the women's squad while you were here. Did that translate at all to rodeo? Why was that your first love compared to what you're doing now?
So I mean, really, we're just like, my whole family's basketball. I came from like a super big basketball family. Like everybody just played basketball. So mainly like my whole life was just straight basketball. And then when I stopped playing basketball and decided just to like focus on school and stuff, it was just like I kind of missed basketball. So it was like, man, I still want to do basketball. So I was trying to figure out a way for me to do basketball, and doing the scout team here was just like a good way to keep doing basketball, stay in shape a little bit, so I don't just lose it all. And then I got the rodeo way more after I started playing basketball, so that's when I was like, okay, I start doing this. But like if I had to choose like rodeo and basketball, like that's just hard for me to choose from, like to pick which one I want to do, just because like both of those is a big part of my life, and it's something I've been doing both like the majority of my life.
So doing multiple things at once has become somewhat of a trend for you over the course of your time here. You were part of the Black Student Association, RISE, a bunch of other things. We won't go through the whole list. What's been your favorite like kind of side thing or group to be part of while you've been on campus?
See, my favorite thing probably to do like my fraternity. Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. That's probably like my first favorite thing that I've joined since coming to college, just because like that's brotherhood. Like I got brothers for life. Like anywhere and everywhere I go, like I'm gonna have somebody down there that's in my frat that it's just automatic brotherhood, and the bond I created with everybody is just like it's like crazy. Like I wouldn't, like if I didn't go that way or even do like a fraternity route, like I'd been missing out on like a whole lot of relationships that I didn't think I needed, but like I should do like need in life. So that probably like my most favorite one.
So amidst all of this, you end up getting into modeling. How did that start? Like where did that come from initially?
So like fun fact, like modeling, like I didn't want to be a model, to be honest with you. Like it wasn't nothing that I even like crossed my mind. Like I never did think like, oh, I want to model, like one day I want to model. It was just like, I had friends that had brands or whatever that want me to take pictures for them. I was like, cool, like I'll do that. And then like some stores in OKC was like, can you come take some pictures? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. But it was like small brands, nothing big. And then Louis Vuitton, somehow I found my Instagram or whatever, and they emailed me and was like, we're doing a fashion show in Paris, and we'd love for you to come down here and model. And I was like, I'm looking at this email, I'm like, is this real or is this like fake? So like the guy who sent it, I Googled his name or whatever. I'm like, is this dude real? And then he had just did spring summer fashion show in Hong Kong for them. So I was like, oh yeah, like this got to be real. And so like after I did Louis Vuitton, but like before I did Louis Vuitton, actually I did Timberland. So I did a shoot for Timberland for their Black History Month, but like nobody even knew I did Timberland because it didn't come out till February. So it wasn't like nothing. Like nobody even knew I even did Timberland. And then I did Louis Vuitton, and then as soon as I got back from Louis Vuitton, Timberland released. So like everybody thought like I did those like back to back, and I was like, no, like I did Timberland like they did that in November. I didn't do Louis Vuitton till January. So it was just like crazy how like I started off with Timberland, but like nobody knew it. Even when I did Timberland, the photographer was like, do you model? And I was like, nah, just rodeo. And he was like, you should like get into modeling or whatever. And I was like, no, I'm cool. Like I'm cool with just rodeoing. And then Louis Vuitton came and they asked me to do that. And then after I did Louis Vuitton, it was just like brands just started reaching out, started doing Stetson and stuff. And I just thank God for opening those doors for me and just letting me just like take off in that, which I would never thought I wanted to be a model, but it was in God's plan. So I'm just following his footsteps and seeing what he has for me.
Like going from high school to the big leagues all of a sudden, does it come fairly easily for you, or do you find that you have to work at it and take instruction, all those sorts of things?
Nah, I feel like it come fairly easy just because like my whole life, like my grandpa was super big in family pictures, and so we always took family pictures, and my mom was like, she forced us to be behind the camera. Like, she forced us to take pictures. Even when we ain't want to, like, it could be like a simple occasion, and we dressing up, whole family taking pictures for it. So, like, my whole life has been, like, taking pictures and stuff, but, like, I never thought I would want to be on, like, this side of it at all. But, now that I'm here, like, I actually like it. So, it's something I'm just keep doing and, see how far I can go with it.
If it's like taking family pictures, none of my kids will ever be models because they can't sit still long enough. Talk us through Fashion Week a little bit when you went to Paris, because for a kid who grew up in Oklahoma, that had to have been a whole different world.
Yeah, so it was super different, actually. So, like, I get there, I'm in my cowboy hat, a cowboy jacket, jeans, and boots or whatever. And like, I get off the plane and whatever, and then like somebody waiting for me to pick me up, whatever, take me to the hotel. So I get to the hotel and like I have to leave in like 30 minutes to go to my fitting. So I go to my fitting or whatever, and as soon as I get there, like they're coming up to me and they were like touching my shoulders and stuff, and I'm like, wait, what's going on? They're like, you're real? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, you're a real cowboy? And I was like, yeah. And they was like, are you a real cowboy? Are you ranch and stuff? And I was like, yeah, like I'm a real cowboy. Like, this is what I do every day. And like they were just so shocked to see like a real cowboy like in person, because like the model world, like they don't see that. Like they just see regular models and stuff, and like for them to see me, whatever, like it was like surreal to them. Like they didn't believe like there's actually like real cowboys out there. And then I put on the boots, whatever they had me, like my outfit. I had to try my outfit through my fitting and like do my walk or whatever. And they were like, you walk so good in boots. And it was like nobody else here walks good in boots. I'm just like, yeah, like I wear cowboy boots every day. Like it's something that I do. And so like the models was having like a hard time walking in the boots or whatever, but like that just came easy to me. And then like walking around Paris and stuff, like I got so many looks at me walking in a cowboy hat, because like that was like their first time seeing a cowboy probably. So like I'll be walking past and like I see people like turn their necks, stop and turn around and look at me. I'm just like, what's going on? But coming from Oklahoma, where seeing a cowboy hat and jeans and boots, like that's nothing. Going over there, like me thinking like it's normal, it's not normal. So like I was definitely like a standout person over there, and it's like so many people asking me like, was I a real cowboy and stuff like that. So it was super different.
So when you go off and you do Fashion Week, or you go do a magazine shoot or whatever it might be, what's it like to then come back to the ranch and be kind of back in your element?
It feels kind of good to be back. Over there, like I miss riding my horses when I was over there and stuff. So like coming back, home and just getting back to what I do daily, like it was kind of like relieving. You know, not always mic'd up or, you know, having cameras around was, you know, kind of nice and relaxing. But, you know, just regular maintenance at the barn, feeding horses, you know, cleaning up, building broken fences, the horse break. So, you know, it felt kind of nice coming back and just being able to just like chill and just get back in my element. Cause like over there, like I was the outcast over there. Like I felt out of my element versus like the models and stuff. Like that was their element. Like they was so just chill and just doing whatever. But like over there, it was like, I don't know what I'm doing, y'all. It's like I need y'all to like to help me. Like how am I supposed to walk? You know, what do I look at and stuff? And like, you know, some would help if like I asked, but like for the most part, it was just like they already knew what to do. Like it was some people who didn't even rehearse. Like they just showed up for the day and were just like, boom, like I got the pattern down and that's it. But when we was over there, like we rehearsed. I was there for a week. Yeah, I was there for a week because I had to do an extra editorial shoot for one of the magazines. And so like when I was there, we rehearsed like 3 days before the show or whatever, and then like the day of, and we rehearsed for like 3 or 4 hours each time, like doing a pattern over and over, like what tile to turn on, what camera to look at, and just for people just to show up the day of and not rehearse and just have it down like that and like not mess up, not miss a beat. It was just like wow. But then like if they came here and, you know, try to do what I do on a ranch or something, like the roles be like flipped. So like I was the outcast over there. So coming here, getting back in my element, you know, I felt real comfortable.
Do you anticipate that this is something that you like want to keep doing? I know you said you've done some other shoots since then. What does that look like in terms of that aspect of your life in the future?
Yeah, so, you know, it's something that I want to keep doing it, but, you know, trying to balance that and vet school at the same time is going to be, you know, something hard because, you know, around this time I was already doing photo shoots. Like, you know, it's going to be December. So at this time I was already talking to Louis Vuitton to leave to go in January and be gone for a whole week. And now that I'm in school, it's like, you know, I can't do that no more. Like I can't just get up and just leave and just go. So really just trying to be able to like balance all that at once.
What have you enjoyed about your experience at Oklahoma State so far, and what are you currently working on degree-wise?
Yeah, so, you know, so far I just like the agriculture part of it, like, you know, all the animals and stuff, and, you know, like the campus is super pretty, you know, and then like the community we have here, it's just like very welcoming. And then like the degree I'm working on, I'm in vet school to get my doctorate in veterinary medicine to become a large animal vet, which, I mean, I say large animal vet, but I know it's mainly just going to be just equine.
What do you want to do with that when you're done?
You know, I want to go back home, back up to Edmond, work with Dr. Crosby down there and just do equine really and just be a vet that, you know, I have, like all my friends and family can go to, because you know, especially like with the black rodeo world, you know, not a lot of them take their horses to vets or whatever. So like for me to be a black vet at that and then be close to them at home in OKC, it's gonna be like you know, sometimes like when the horse, you know, get sick or whatever, get hurt, you know, they can come to the vet now. Like maybe I can be the reason to, you know, convince them to come to the vet, whatever. Because for the most part of it, like black cowboys, we pretty much just doctor our own horses. Like my grandpa doctored his own horses when he could. So, you know, for the most part of it, just trying to like have a safe space for, you know, black cowboys to come and like bring the animals and stuff.
Have you gotten to do a shoot with a horse?
I have.
You have? What was that like? What did you enjoy about that?
Being on the horse, being able to take photos of the horse and just like broadcast like how good the horse looked. And then being able to like do with the clothes, like anything with a horse, like I'm down doing anything with a horse, like no matter what, just because like I love horses, I love riding horses, and you know I've been doing that ever since I was super little. So anything that involves a horse, like I was just down for. Like I'd rather do a photo shoot with a horse than just do a photo shoot by myself.
Well, clearly Cowboy runs in the family and riding horses, and soon you'll be a vet to boot and taking care of horses. So we really appreciate the time and wish you luck the rest of the way.
All right, thank you.
That'll do it for this time. Stay tuned for the next edition of the Inside OSU Podcast.